Welcome to Thoughts and Theories. In the early hours of September 26, 1983, the world unknowingly stood on the edge of complete destruction. No explosions, no missiles in the sky, and no soldiers on alert, at least not visibly. Yet that night, the fate of humanity rested in the hands of one Soviet officer, and a single decision. His name was Stanislav Petrov. Most people have never heard of him. He wasn't a general, a politician, or a president. He didn't hold world-shaping power in any official sense. He was an ordinary man in an extraordinary moment. And in that moment, his judgment, guided not by ideology or orders, but by simple human reason, may have saved the entire planet from nuclear war. To understand his story, we have to go back to the height of the Cold War. The year was 1983, and tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union were near their breaking point. President Ronald Reagan had called the USSR an evil empire. NATO was conducting a massive military exercise called Able Archer that simulated a full-scale nuclear war. Soviet leaders, already paranoid from decades of tension, believed a real attack could happen at any time. In this atmosphere of fear and mistrust, the Soviet Union had built an early warning system called OKO. Its job was to detect American missile launches and give the Soviets a few minutes to respond to fire their own missiles before being destroyed. In short, the system existed to make sure that if the US attacked, both sides would burn. This was the doctrine of mutually assured destruction, the idea that no one would dare start a war if it guaranteed everyone's annihilation. But that night, technology almost broke the logic of deterrence. Stanislav Petrov was on duty at Serpaka 15, a secret bunker near Moscow that monitored satellite data. Around midnight, alarms suddenly screamed. The computer showed that a single intercontinental ballistic missile had been launched from the United States, heading straight toward the Soviet Union. Then another, then three more. 5 in total. Imagine that moment. The red lights flashing, the sirens blaring, his subordinates frozen in terror, waiting for an order. Petrov's job was clear: to report the detection immediately. His report would go up the chain to the highest Soviet command. Within minutes, the Soviet leadership would have to decide whether to launch their nuclear weapons in retaliation. If he reported it as a real attack, there was every chance the Soviet missiles would launch. Within minutes, the US would detect them and respond. The end result would have been millions, maybe hundreds of millions, dead, and a nuclear winter that could have ended civilization as we know it. But Petrov hesitated. He looked at the data again. Everything in the system said attack. The technology was screaming at him to believe it, but his intuition said otherwise. Why only 5 missiles? Why not hundreds? If the US really wanted to destroy the Soviet Union, they would launch everything at once, not just 5. It didn't make sense. And so, instead of following procedure, Petrov made a quiet, rational choice. He declared it a false alarm. He broke protocol. He took full responsibility. Minutes passed. The radar showed no incoming missiles. He was right. The attack had been caused by a rare alignment of sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds that fooled the satellites. A technical glitch, nothing more. But that glitch could have been the spark for the end of the world. The most remarkable thing is that Petrov didn't see himself as a hero. When interviewed years later, he said he was just doing his job. But the truth is, most people in his position would not have done what he did. Soviet officers were trained to obey orders, not to question the system. Disobedience could mean prison, or worse. And yet, he chose to trust reason over fear. The story remained secret for years. The Soviet Union didn't reward him. They reprimanded him for failing to record the incident properly. He retired quietly, living in a small apartment near Moscow, barely making ends meet. It wasn't until after the fall of the Soviet Union that the story came out, and people realized how close the world had come to annihilation. When you think about it, it's terrifying how fragile the balance was and still is. A single computer error, a single misunderstanding, could have ended human history. Petrov's decision reminds us that civilization depends not only on systems and governments, but on individuals who can think clearly when it matters most. This raises a deeper question. Why do humans build systems capable of destroying everything we love in seconds? The Cold War was driven by fear. Fear of being weaker, fear of being attacked first, fear of losing power. Each side believed the other was the aggressor, but both were trapped in the same logic of survival. It's strange. We often imagine that reason and intelligence make humans safe, but Petrov's story shows the opposite. Our intelligence created the danger in the first place. We built machines that could end the world in the name of protecting it, and it took one man, using nothing more than common sense and calm skepticism, to save us from our own brilliance. This is one of the paradoxes of modern history. We celebrate progress, technology, science, military power, yet all of these things are dubbed. The same knowledge that allows us to split the atom for energy can also split cities apart. The same satellites that connect the world can be used to target destruction. The line between creation and annihilation is razor thin, and Petrov, that night, stood right on that line. There's also something profoundly human in his reasoning. He didn't rely on faith, ideology, or blind obedience. He relied on a question: does this make sense? That question, small, rational, almost ordinary, is what saved billions of lives. It's a reminder that critical thinking isn't just an intellectual exercise. Sometimes, it's the only thing standing between life and extinction. When we look back at the 20th century, it's filled with wars, genocides, and political madness. Yet it's also filled with moments when individuals, not nations, not armies, changed everything. Think of Vasily Arkhipov, the Soviet naval officer who refused to launch a nuclear torpedo during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Think of Oskar Schindler, who saved over 1,000 Jews during the Holocaust. And think of Petrov sitting in a bunker, making a decision that the world would never thank him for, but that kept it alive. It's ironic that his story wasn't widely told in schools or history books. Maybe it's because it doesn't fit neatly into national pride or military glory. There's no victory to celebrate, no flag raised, no enemy defeated. His heroism lies in restraint, in not pressing a button, not following orders. In a world obsessed with action, he saved humanity by doing nothing. That's something rare. Most people want to act when they feel threatened, but Petrov knew that action without understanding can be catastrophic. He resisted panic, and maybe that's the real lesson. Our survival as a species might depend less on our ability to act, and more on our ability to pause and think before we do. Today, decades later, the threat hasn't disappeared. There are still thousands of nuclear weapons on alert, ready to launch within minutes. The technology is faster, more complex, and just as vulnerable to error. Artificial intelligence now plays a role in defense systems, which adds another layer of risk, because machines don't doubt, they calculate. And sometimes, a moment of doubt is exactly what saves us. Stanislav Petrov's story reminds us that moral courage isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's a single human saying, wait. He once said that he was just in the right place at the right time, but that's not true. The truth is, he was the right person in that place at that time. Because if he had been a little more afraid, a little more obedient, a little more trusting of the machine, we wouldn't be here to tell his story. When he died in 2017, the world barely noticed. No state funeral, no medals, no monuments, just a man in a small apartment, remembered by those who happened to know what he had done. But perhaps that's fitting. His story isn't about glory, it's about humility. The humility to recognize that even the mightiest systems can be wrong, and that sometimes, humanity must override the machine. It's strange to think that civilization once balanced on the instincts of one man staring at a flickering screen. But it did. And perhaps that's both terrifying and comforting. Terrifying because it shows how fragile we are. Comforting because it shows how one person's reason and calm can hold the line for everyone. So next time someone says that one person can't change the world, remember Stanislav Petrov. Because once, for a few minutes in 1983, he did. And because of that, we're still here.